Okay, I want to say before we start our regular class, I want to remind those of you who need to be reminded that tonight is Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh means it's the first day of the new month, and it's a mini festival. It's a mini festival because, like all the beginnings on the calendar, just like Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the new year, so Rosh Chodesh is the beginning of a new month. And on Rosh Hashanah, when the new year begins, you need to take a bit of a reckoning and see how you did last year and prepare for a year to come. So too you should do with every Rosh Chodesh. But this Rosh Chodesh in particular is unique because it is Rosh Chodesh for the month of Av. And in the month of Av, the Mishnah says, then when the month of Av comes, you have to be sad. That's a very strange thing that the Mishnah is forcing us to feel sadness. The Mishnah also says in the month of Adar, you have to be happy. That's another weird thing that the Mishnah, basically, apparently Judaism dictates our feelings. So you say, how is that possible? And the answer is, it's quite possible. We can do things to make us happy, and we can do things to make us sad. For example, I don't know if you could see me clearly, but I can't stand having a beard. It's so uncomfortable. And my wife hates it. So I do this because it is during this time period, and I'm in a state of mourning for the temple for thousands of years ago. So therefore, I have this, I make myself feel uncomfortable. Interestingly, I just want to tell you that in the days of Corona, the rabbis are more lenient than normal. Usually for the past 2 weeks, my beard would be much bigger, but I was allowed to shave because the rabbi said, you know what, we're miserable enough. That's an interesting thing that the rabbi said, which is, some of these laws are meant for us to, it's up to us and to see where we're doing and what's going on. Certain laws are biblical, and therefore, even if we're uncomfortable, we still have to follow, no questions. But other laws are customs. Other laws are traditions. And if in the state of Corona that I'm stuck in my house and it's really difficult, and I usually listen to music. So the great rabbis said you can listen to music now, all the way till Tisha B'Av. Usually for the 3 weeks, we don't listen to happy music. So this is one example. Another example is that some people say if you're stuck in your house and you have nothing to do, but you have a swimming pool, so usually you're not allowed to go swimming during the 9 days, but some rabbis are being lenient. So I just wanted to share with you that this idea of Jewish law being somewhat malleable to difficult situations in the world would make a lot of sense. Obviously, if there's, the laws of Shabbat, if there's someone's life is in danger, then we also change the laws because life comes first. So in a normal situation, which is what we're in, which we're not in, but in a normal situation, the 9 days means no weddings, no eating meat or drinking wine, because that makes you too happy. Of course, I don't like wine and I don't eat meat, so I'm okay in that department. No comfortable long showers in hot water and to luxuriate, to make yourself comfortable. No doing laundry. That's a big one. Okay. And no shaving, of course. And all of this leads up to the day of Tisha B'Av, which is in 9 days from tonight, where you can't even sit on a chair. You have to sit on the floor, and you have to follow all the rules of Tisha B'Av. So I just wanted to share that with you, and next week I'll give you an update about the laws of Tisha B'Av. But these are basically the laws of the 9 days. It's interesting, during the laws of the 9 days, you're not supposed to try to, repent. It's not about repentance. It's about feeling sad and grieving. Um, there's another discussion to be had, which is a little complicated to go into right now, but it might relate to what we're about to learn. The discussion is, how sad are we really supposed to be in light of the modern state of Israel, in light of rebuilding Jerusalem, in light of 5-6 million Jews living peacefully, more or less, in the land, in light of more studying going on and the society and judges, and it doesn't sound like the Israel of the destruction that they talked about for 2,000 years. In which case, we would need someone really, really with wide shoulders to stand up and say, wait a second, I'm not sure we should be doing all this fasting for the destruction, even though, yes, the temple's not built, okay, but Jerusalem's built, and Israel is built, and people are coming from all over the place. Doesn't that deserve to have some kind of effect on how we normally see ourselves? Isn't it a bit rude of Jews to act like everything's in destruction when we're sitting here in the land of Israel? It's kind of like slapping God in the face and saying, yeah, you did miracles and gave us the land of Israel, but we're going to still consider it as if we're in exile. This is very delicate. The reason that it's delicate is because what has kept the Jews together in exile for thousands of years is the same thing that's going to put a bit of a stranglehold on us. What's kept us together is strict adherence to tradition. So now that we might be in a new reality, people are very uncomfortable saying, well, we have to change our strict adherence to the old tradition. This is what we did for thousands of years. You know that in my daily prayers, I still say, God, please help us return to Zion. I shouldn't say that anymore. I should say, God, thank you for helping us return to Zion. This is where Orthodox Judaism is a little complicated. Reform and conservative Judaism were much quicker to make changes, and they had their own consequences, for good or for bad. They were much more able to say, hey, there's a new reality. Whereas Orthodox tradition, we're not so quick to make such changes. Okay, that's one of the major differences. And once again, it hurts us sometimes because I think that changes need to be made. But you need Orthodox Judaism is a slow-moving ship, not so easy to turn one way or the other. It requires a whole long process. Okay, that's what I wanted to share with regard to that. Now we finished the book of Joshua, and we're starting the book of Judges. Okay, and I want to tell you the following information. The book of Joshua is quite possibly the most successful book in terms of the actions of the children of Israel, the most successful book in the canon. Minus one guy who sins, basically the book is filled with people who follow God, listen to Joshua, conquer the land, settle the land, stay together, are unified. It seems like it's perfect. Unfortunately, it's not perfect, and the beginning of the book of Judges teaches this to us. But let's just look at the last chapter of Joshua to appreciate where they are. Joshua is about to die. He successfully followed God's command and got the people. Oh, what have I done? Excuse me. Sorry. Okay. Here we are. Verse 1. At the end of his life, God gave Israel rest from all the enemies around them. And when Joshua was old and well advanced in years, he brought together all of Israel and he said, I'm old. And it's time for me to say goodbye. And then he gives them some good lectures about what God did. He, killed all the nations, and we succeeded in inheriting the land, and everyone's in their tribes. And you have to remember, he says, to follow the laws of Moses. Don't deviate it from right or left to right. And you remember to keep God on your minds at all times. And remember the teaching of Moses, right? This is Joshua teaching. This is what happens when you follow the ways of the Lord. Around 40 years, let's say, Joshua does what he does with the people, and they followed him, and he's giving his last, message. But look at verse 13. Know for certain, verse 12. Should you turn away and attach yourself to the remnant of those nations, to those that are left among you, and intermarry with them, you joining them and they joining you, know for certain that the Lord your God will not continue to drive these nations out before you. They shall become a snare and a trap for you, a scourge to your sides and thorns in your eyes until you perish from this good land that God has given you. The story is that while they conquered and settled most of the land, there were certain parts of the land that they left the inhabitants there, the natives. And Joshua says, listen, if you leave them there and you're quiet and you don't bother them and they don't bother you, that's one thing. But if you start marrying them and you start following their idolatry and you start turning away from God, then that is going to cause you to, God's going to get angry, and everything you've built up is going to end up being destroyed. These, unfortunately, were prescient words, and they were what Joshua was telling them, but they, of course, didn't believe him. And the book ends with Joshua telling a whole history story about what they've accomplished, where they are, what they need to continue doing, how they have to stay connected to God and people, and get rid of their idols. And the people in verse 21 say, but the people replied to Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. They were very confident. And Joshua says, okay, that's good. You continue. And he sent everyone home. And in verse 29, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110 years. And he's buried in Asher, in the mountains of Ephraim. And here it says in verse 31, Israel served the Lord during the lifetime of Joshua and the lifetime of the elders who lived on after Joshua and who experienced all the deeds that the Lord had wrought for Israel. And this is the conclusion, which is a beautiful conclusion and a successful period in Jewish history. And then comes the next book. And the next book is everything that they were warned about, they end up doing. And everything that we were nervous about, that there were holes in the system, those end up becoming wide chasms, which cause a major which cause a major destruction. The book of Judges, by its very name, is different than the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua is about one person, a central governing system. There was Moses, right? There was Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, and then there was Joshua. And the line was very straightforward. They were unifying personalities. They kept the people together. They ruled with a strong hand. And as soon as Joshua died, no one took over. And this is a theme that runs in the biblical story. For the biblical era, they need a strong central unifying power. Okay? The judge's story is about decentralized power. What happens when there's no unifying force? Not on the political side, and not even on the religious side. So we end up with judges. Now, judges are, right, maybe righteous. Well, I'll say they are leaders, but they're leaders for specific areas, for specific groups, for specific tribes. Remember, there are 12 tribes. They're throughout the country. They don't have a place to go to that they can all, they kind of do where the Mishkan is, the tabernacle is, in a place called Shiloh, but we learn that they don't really do that. They don't go there so often. So, we have, it's the late Iron Age, and it's after, the Exodus, and it's after the conquest of the land. It's before King David, it's before the temple is built, and you have a period of a few hundred years, maybe 100 years. It's unclear how to find this in the chronology. So let's read and we'll see quickly in the first chapters what's the problem. So in the beginning, actually, there's no problem. What happens is after the death of Joshua, the Israelites do the right thing. They say, who is going to go and conquer the Canaanites? And the Lord responded, let Judah go. And Judah says to his brother, go with me and I'll help you. And this is how, it's supposed to be. And they go and they conquer the Canaanites, 10,000 people. And they conquer the Perizzites. And they kill whoever needs to be killed. And they conquer Jerusalem. And then they conquer the Canaanites sitting in the mountain in the Negev. And Judah goes to the Canaanites sitting in Hebron, and he conquers Hebron. So all of this seems very, very positive. And there's a famous, an early judge named Othniel who conquers parts of Judah where I live. Here's an interesting verse in verse 16. The descendants of the Canaanite, the father-in-law of Moses, went up with the Judites from the city of palms to the wilderness of Judah, and they went and settled among the people of the Negev of Arad. Why is this interesting? Apparently, there's an allowance for people who are willing, non-Jews, who are willing to abide by the rules and live with the Israelites together, like the descendants of Jethro. They are able to live there without a problem because there was no threat that they were going to turn the people away from Judaism. Now we're going to meet a descendant of this family who's a descendant of the father-in-law of Moses. We're going to meet him later in the story, and she actually becomes a great heroine. Okay? But now look at this. Look what happens in verse 21. So these are all verses of the success that they're having in conquering the land. And then verse 21, the Benjamites did not conquer the Jebusite inhabitants, and the Jebusites dwelt together with the Benjaminites to this day. Verse 27. Manasseh did not conquer the inhabitants of Beit Shan, or of Tanakh, or the inhabitants of Dor, which is actually right up my up the mountain, up the coast here, or the Megiddo, and the Canaanites persisted dwelling in this region. Why? Why didn't they conquer? God says conquer, and we discussed already in depth that they would have to conquer men, women, and children. It was some, divine decision. Why didn't they do it? And then comes the answer, which we don't want to read, but we have to. Verse 28. But when Israel gained the upper hand, they instead subjected the Canaanites to forced labor, but didn't get rid of them. So why didn't they kill the remainder or kick them out? Because they had free labor. And they paid them a tax. And the same thing in verse 30, or at verse 29, Ephraim, one of the tribes, didn't get rid of the people from Gezer. And Zebulun didn't get rid of the people from Kitron and the Canaanites. And Asher didn't get rid of the people from Akko. So the Asherites dwelled together with the Canaanites, and they didn't get rid of them. And Naphtali didn't get rid of the people from Beit Shemesh, but rather they paid them a tax. And that's the end of the chapter, which means that as good as it was in the story of Joshua, when things are going well, they're going 90% well, you don't care so much about the 10%. And that's what happened in the book of Joshua. 90% successful. Remember, the rest of the Bible, the Jews are around at 40% successful. So they're usually not very abiding, all right? But in the book of Joshua, 90% they follow almost everything. And then they left out 10%. The problem is that 10% appears in big numbers in the beginning of the book of Joshua. Because if there's a 1% in this tribe, and 1% in this tribe, and 1% in the north, and 1% in the south, and 1% in the mountain, and each one influences the Israelites, and they start intermarrying, and they start worshiping idolatry, then the system starts to crumble. So let's read. An angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to a place called Bochim. The Bible sometimes does this. The reason the place is called Bochim is because Bochim means to cry, which means that the angel tells them something. Everybody cried, and they called the place where everyone cried. So sometimes names are based on stories that take place. Why? The angel comes, and he says to them, didn't we have a deal? The deal was, God says, I will take care of you. I will not break my covenant with you. And your job is to break the altars of the idolatry and to not make a covenant with the people of the land. But guess what? You didn't follow it. And those same people who you decided you can make some money from, there turns out to be thorns in your sides. They're the ones who keep making you stray away from God. And in verse 4, when the angel of the Lord spoke these words, everyone started crying. And they said, you're right, we made a terrible mistake. And they offered sacrifices to the Lord. They're going to fix their ways. But then Joshua died. And another generation arose which had not experienced God. And what they did was offensive to God. And they started worshiping the Baalim. And they forsook God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt. And they followed other gods from among the gods of the people around them and bowed down to them and they provoked the Lord, and they worshipped the Baal and the Ashtarot. So what happened? God got angry, and he handed them over to enemies who plundered them, who persecuted them. He surrendered them to the enemies on all sides. This is interesting because this is basically, it's giving you it's like an abstract. You know, if you read an article, there's the first part, the first paragraph, which is what the entire book is about. This chapter is what the entire book is about. There is something called the circle of the book of Judges. A circle because the people, it works like this: the people start in one position following God, but then very quickly they sin against God, and then God punished them by sending them, that one of the nations starts subjugating them, and then they persecute them terribly. And from that terrible place, they call out to God. God sends a judge who saves them and gets them back to their position. For a few years, they're good until they do the same thing over again. The same thing over again. This is called the Ma'agal, the circle of unfortunately repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. And that's exactly what the angel is saying in verse 14. Verse 13, they sinned. Verse 14, there's punishment. Then they call out to God. And then verse 16, there's a judge that saves them. And sometimes they don't even listen to the judge. And sometimes they listen to the judge, but then once again, they go and sin, and they sin again. So this is a very sad chapter in which God kind of is testing the people. We learned that God tests the people. God tests us. In the desert, they were tested. It says so in the Torah. They were tested. How do you get tested by God? I guess to travel for a day and there's no water. That's a test. So what do you do when you don't have water? I guess the answer is you're supposed to call out in the name of God and plead God and pray to him. But if you don't believe in God so much, so then you'll look for other ways, or you'll blaspheme, or you'll return, or you'll rebel, and that's the test. So there can be a test of the land of Israel as well. In other words, they're worthy to enter the land, they're worthy to conquer the land, but then are they worthy to keep the land? Certainly in a position where there are people who are strangers, who are idol worshippers, who are their neighbors because they left them there. So God says, okay, I will test you. I will make it so that they stay there. In other words, if you don't kill them, I'm going to leave them. And we'll see how you fare with them as your neighbors who are right around you. So who, in chapter 3 of Shoftim, talks about who God left in the land of Israel to test the people. One group is called the Plishtim. We're going to learn about these Plishtim for the next, several books of the Bible. The Plishtim are a seafaring people that live along the coast of ancient Canaan, right? They, according to scholars, they come originally from Crete, or they come from Greek islands, and because they found pottery from there that is exactly the same pottery as the Philistine villages that they found in an archaeological village. The archaeologists are able to determine which ancient settlement was Jewish and which was Philistine, based on what they found there. Animal sacrifices that were pig or something like that, they would attribute to non-Jews, and the pottery, and they were able to date everything. It's a whole fascinating field of biblical archaeology. The Philistines, whom we will encounter in the story of the Judges, in the story of King Saul, in the stories of the prophet Samuel, in the stories of King David, okay, they're a constant thorn in the side of the Jewish people, of the Israelites. They have their own god. The god's name is Dagon, which is like a fish god, which makes sense if you're seafaring people. So then, a great fish is going to be your symbol. They had these city-states. One of them was Ashkelon. One of them was Ashdod. These are modern-day Israeli cities, but in ancient times, they belonged to the Philistines. One of them is Aza, Ekron, and Gat. Okay, so these are the people that we're going to be hearing about a lot. There's some fascinating stories regarding the Philistines. If we know a little bit of our Bible, we should know one famous hero who has some trouble with the Philistines. Anyone? Okay, so we're learning it for the first time. No problem. The answer is Samson. You've heard of Samson? Margaret doesn't know Samson. Okay, so this is why we're doing this, okay? We are doing this because it is unheard of that you should become a Jewish person and not know who Samson is, okay? So I will not let you become Jewish until you know this this story. As for
Samson.
Samson. Oh, you know Samson. Oh, okay. So the point is that we need to know this. We need to, be aware of who are the players, who are the personalities, and who are the heroes, and especially in the book of the Judges, what we need to do is define a hero. Now, if I said to you, in the Bible, in the 5 books of Moses, define a hero, what's the definition of a hero? What would you say?
He will fight. This type of person will fight against the most strongest one who are on the
Fine. So Margaret says a hero is strong and fights. What else is a hero? A biblical hero.
The person that wins or saves the people.
A person that defends the people. Who else is a hero?
Wins and saves the people. So
saves
wins the battle.
Absolutely. Who else?
Yeah. Someone who is stays firm to Judaism in a way.
Yeah, yeah. Alina says obviously a hero is going to be committed to God and to the people of Israel. We all agree with that, right? So those are 3 good descriptions of a hero. What's interesting is you might also say, I don't know, someone from the Jewish people, from a family of the Israelites, like someone we'd expect. the judges aren't necessarily going to fill all of these characteristics. So that's a very interesting change. And we have to ask ourselves why. What is it? Why is the hero, the hero and the judges, why is he different than a regular hero? All right, there's 3 minutes left to this introduction, so we will start right away. Yeah, so we already start with verse 7, that the Israelites did something offensive to God. What is it? They worshipped Baalim and Ashtaroth. I will give you a class on what it means to worship the Baalim and the Ashtaroth. So God gets angry, all right? It's a very causal relationship. They sin, God gets angry and sells them to the Kushan Rasha, to non-Jewish they stay in Israel, but they subject to these people for 8 years. Verse 9, then they call out to God. And God responds and sends a warrior, Otniel ben Kenaz, the brother of Kalev, whom we remember. And verse 10, he has a spirit of God, and he goes to battle, and he defeats them. And verse 11, the land is quiet for 40 years. Verse 12, the people sin again. And then a king of Moab comes, and he subjugates them. Verse 14, for 18 years they have to serve Moab. Verse 15, they call out to God. Verse 16, God sends a hero. God sends a judge or a hero who's going to take care of them. But for this, we will have to wait until next week. This Thursday, we will have class on Parshat Dvarim, and we will talk about that. Then the hero is going to be, because, we only have 30 seconds left, but the hero in the beginning is a very quick story of, he did it and he took, but then comes the tactics and the strategy and the personalities, and the personalities start getting more involved, and you start learning more about the heroes, and you start learning that there's a different definition of hero, because it's a reflection of the people. Think about that. The hero is a reflection of the people. When the people are great, the hero is that much greater. But what happened when the people are not so great? Then we start learning of these heroes that are questionable in terms of their